Thank you for joining us today. We will be reading a lovely magical book called The 21 Lessons of Merlyn. This is a study in Druid magic and lore written by wonderful Douglas Munro. Again, thank you for joining us today. If you're new to the channel, please don't hesitate to press follow and subscribe button. After you do that, you're going to find a bell. When you see that little bell, I want you to ring it. Make sure that you get all of our channel notifications. So whenever we go live or post a new video, you will know. Love that. Okay, so this is going to be the prologue today, which is a little bit to get through, but I will attempt to do so. In this book are some lovely illustrations, but I rush a disclaimer to you real quick. I do have 6 parakeets that love to sing. They're quite sweethearts. So you may hear them chirping in the background. And if you do not like parakeets, then you may as well just go ahead and exit now, because guarantee it, once I get started, they will tweet a little bit. All right. I'm getting a candle. Good, good, good. All right. I need you guys to welcome each other, include each other, accept each other. You guys can, the chat belongs to you now. Ready? Set, go. Feather, feather, feather. The 21 Lessons of Merlyn. We wish to call to the reader's attention that this book is a masterful reconstruction of Celtic mythology and Arthurian legend, combined into certain styles of format, combined into a program of instruction in mythical thinking and magical techniques. Certain styles of format, typography, and illustration have been utilized that at times may appear as awkward or disruptive to the smooth flow of the narrative, but which are, in actuality, psychological, nearly subliminal signposts that act to alert the unconscious mind to the magical lesson within the text. The author's method has many precedents in the wisdom teachings of East and West, but most truly in the Druidic tradition that he has followed, and of which he is foremost exponent. Carl Llewellyn Wesch, publisher. So here we are, the 21 Lessons of Merlyn, a study in Druidic magic and lore by Douglas Munro. To Joseph and the apprentice within us all. Some acknowledgements, some contents, a wonderful map. This is Arthur's Britain, circa 500 AD. Now we come to the prologue. The world from which the stories come lies still within the astral mists. W.B. Yeats, Irish poet. To those with an interest or fascination in the matter of Britain, Arthurian lore, fact or fantasy, Druidism, and the mysticism of Merlin, this book is a first of a kind. The 21 Lessons of Merlyn deal with a unique segment of British history, the time of legends, that shadowy Dark Age period which is often referred to but seldom explored, and never in the light of reliable historic documentation. This book figures around the retelling and clarification of an obscure and scattered series of Welsh folk tales concerning the boyhood of King Arthur, collected from a variety of sources, including the National Museum of Wales, local populace, rare manuscripts, both published and obscure, some housed in private collections in Wales, England, and the public and university libraries at Cardiff, Oxford, London, and Dublin. All accounts deal with the apprenticeship of the boy king Arthur under the traditional guidance of Merlin, the last of the great Druids who represents the culmination of Britain's mystic past. During several visits to England, the author, a long-time Arthurian enthusiast with a bend for history, was struck by the number of story settings and fragmented legends dealing with the historic 5th century boy king he encountered within the Celtic insular countries, as opposed to the knight of shining armor image, which currently dominates American Arthurian perspectives. As a result, he began to collect and amass these unfamiliar storylines until they began to repeat on themselves in a definite pattern. 21 of the themes appearing over and over within the collection. Within the collection. In addition, these tales soon fell into a definite, if not rough, chronological order, which seemed to indicate a common point of origin, a time when the tales probably existed within a single framework. To supply these with dates as accurate as possible, it was necessary to draw from the Welsh Chronicles, an early series of genealogical charts which record the birth and death dates of Arthur as 462 to 516 AD. More specific info may be found in the epilogue. So, let it be understood from here on in that we are not dealing with the popular legendary figure created by medieval romance writers, but with an actual historic personage, with the shadow of a real man who had in his childhood years a unique and well-attested interaction with Druidism. And then perhaps it was on account of this unique exposure that the boy grew into a legendary figure so overwhelming that people have never since ceased to write and dream about him in his world. Now, as to the person of Merlin, he is the ever-present force behind each of the lessons, where his name was found recorded in 6 of the 11 written sources using the Lyn form. In each, he is obviously not a court magician type, but a powerful mystic figure, a druid, the last great pagan champion of a dying age, pursuing his traditional responsibility of preparing the young Arthur for legendary kingship within an age of tumult and change. Remarkably, we find the earliest setting of the lessons at Tintagel in Cornwall, the long-held traditional birthplace of Arthur. We even find the Druid weaving lessons within a cave under the island, which has borne his name since time immemorial. And this brings to bear the final paramount overtone of the accounts, the concern for Druidism as a national heritage, and the story and the reasons for its decline. To supply a framework for this understanding, the author has drawn from a late medieval reconstruction of perhaps the most famed work on Druidism, the Book of Ferralt, or more properly, one of the books of Ferralt. The triads of the Briton Ferralt, the Gorchon of Maldru, and the Song of the Forest Trees, but in actuality the latter two were found to be contained within the first two, perhaps indicating that they were originally separate, but later then edited together under one title. The Ferralt were the legendary priests of Pharaon, an extremely ancient god whose worshippers were said to be inhabitants of the lost continent of Atlantis. According to the myth, as told within the Ferralt text, relates with when Atlantis disappeared in a single day and night of misfortune. Many of its sun priests washed ashore onto the western banks of Wales, the one country most often referred to as the homestead of Druidism, and there re-established their highly insightful and advanced religion. To the Druids, then, this legendary priesthood represented the roots of their own religion, their ancestors, so to speak. And this could also explain why the Druids revered the mountain of Snowdonia, your Witfa, the tallest peak in Wales, to the extent they did, for it was upon the roots of this mountain that the feral priesthood was said to have had its chief sanctuary. And furthermore, there does exist at the very spot indicated the remains of an immense circular building of stone, the origins of which continue to baffle even today's experts. The Ferals would have occupied Britain during a time which historians have dubbed megalithic or Neolithic, New Stone Age, a period which was characterized by the building of innumerable massive stone and earthwork constructions, the megaliths, of which Stonehenge is the best known surviving example. Others are Silbury Hill, Glastonbury Tor, Avebury, Newgrange, Maze Howe, Callanish, Brogger, Carnac, and endless others. The Ferald would have coexisted with an unsophisticated populace of native Britons who were peaceful by nature and prone to nomadic or simple agricultural life, but certainly not to the building of technical, astronomically aligned stoneworks of gigantic proportions. A question which now comes about having long puzzled archaeologists, anthropologists, and historians is how precisely early man, not so inclined by natural culture, managed to build such advanced structures. In the light of this present discussion centering upon the Ferald, one interesting possibility surfaces. Perhaps this legendary and learned priesthood from Atlantis was responsible. Could they have brought some of their advanced knowledge to bear in Stone Age Britain and organized the people into building such monuments? The existence of a singular unit of measurement, the megalithic yard, MY equals 0.829 meter, would support this idea. This unit was used and acknowledged all over Britain by builders of each prehistoric monument listed above, and thereby implies an advanced system of organization. The theory of a mysterious and capable priesthood, whose origins are unknown, has already been put forth in recent years by numerous learned men. In consideration of this, plus the evidence set down in the Book of Ferald, however historically accurate its origins, the author believes this theory well worth considering and well within the range of probability. The Ferald were also said to have established an important religious center on Glastonbury Tor around 2000 BC, as well as having fashioned an oak walk and labyrinth maze winding to its summit, plus the legendary sun ring of stones at its top, which can still be heard told of in story to this day. Apparently, the priesthood had strong affiliations to triadic pyramid-like forms like the Egyptians, and for this reason was attracted to the basic tertiary contour of the hill. The Ferald were also ascribed the act of first naming the site Ynwystron, meaning Glass Island. The one final bit of information given concerning these stones was that during the Battle of the Trees in 400 BC, the mighty ring was cast down, by whom is not mentioned, and one stone was left standing, which came to be called the Tor Stone, by ensuring generations of inhabitants, including Avalon. This last menhir then remained in place until St. Columba's attack on Avalon in 563 AD, when it was broken up, dragged down, and thrust upon the foundations of the new abbey, erected to the greater glory of the one true God. The Book of Saints and Wonders and Chronicles of St. Columba. The Feralds were then said to retreat to their glass towers upon the feet of Mount Snowdon in Wales, and thereafter the Druids continued to bear the torch of wisdom throughout the land. Mythology and Rites of the British Druids, Rev.E. Davies. But now, back to the Ferald book itself. Like its companion work entitled Bardas, the manuscript was purportedly compiled from a much earlier work by Virgil, by the 16th century Llewellyn Llewellyn scion of Glamorgan, and was once part of the notorious library of Owen Morgan, also known as Morion, a self-styled Druid of Victorian England, whose writings came under very vast criticism for their grand, unsubstantiated claims. In order to avoid confusion between this work and present text, let it be made clear that the person of Arthur is never once mentioned in the Feralt, even in prophecy, as he is the product of a far later age. Any and all specific date references are calculated from the Battle of Moytura and Magturid, MT, which took place in 1870 BC. Nevertheless, the philosophy behind this truly remarkable work fits in ideally with the thematic undertones of the 21 lessons, and now housed in a private collection of the Albion Lodge of the United Ancient Order of Druids of Oxford. Its insights have provided the major source for matters Druidic. Throughout this book, as will be covered later, um, an edited edition. Yes, an edited edition of the Feralt material provides the second key volume to follow and accompany this book, used as a lens through which to view the Merlin Arthur stories. The Book of Feralt fuses perfectly to make a unique statement of today's world, but before touching further on the mythology of the issue, it would seem appropriate to paint a picture of the old world and its culture from which the stories came, the twilight realm of Celtic Dark Age Britain. The term Dark Age Britain refers specifically to the vitally important but little understood historic period from the withdrawal of Rome in 425 to the Norman conquests, culminating in the Battle of Hastings in 1066. It was a time of settlement, of land won and held at bloody sword point, of lesser kings warring amongst themselves, a fragmented nation. It saw the coming of Christianity and, along with it, the persecution, absorption, and virtual extinction of native Celtic religion, namely the Druids. The Celts themselves were a vast composite nation of people united by a common culture and dominating nearly half the known world at one point. The term Celtic actually refers to a culture and not a specific country or nationality. Celtic culture found its way to the shores of Britain in waves of invasion, most notably about 400 BC, the very date the native Celtic legendary assigns to the Battle of the Trees. This date has long marked the traditional beginnings of Druidism, which persisted throughout the years of Roman occupation. The arrival of the Celts found the native people, the Britons, or Brythons, a fairly peaceful and religious-minded folk, well developed in agriculture and the building of simple stone monuments to their gods and ancestors. The resultant fusion produced a unique tribal race, fiercely romantic and superstitious, yet law-loving and multi-skilled. Each of the tribe or clan, usually defined by blood or marriage, had well-marked and logical boundaries within which they had framed and hunted and worshipped their gods. They had farmed and hunted and worshipped their gods. Each kept to themselves a self-sufficient community, except during times of war, when tribes were allied against a common enemy or occasionally a foreign invader. To quote the Roman Polybius of the nature and disposition of the Celts, he says, "They have great stature and bearing, with blue-eyed fairness. Their womenfolk are prolific and good mothers. Their men warlike, passionate, generous and easily provoked, but generous and unsuspicious. They show themselves eager for culture and establish centers for education in their towns. They are natural horsemen, are brave, loyal, and strong. Their houses are large and constructed of arched timbers, with wall work and clay. Only in realms of religion and magic do they respond to the stern finger of obedience and personal discipline." During the Dark Ages, the threat of war was a constant problem, more so before and after the Roman domination, as other nations came in hordes to settle and conquer the fertile soil and to mine the abundant metals. By the time that the Roman armies pulled off of Britain's shores in 425 AD, the nation was in chaos. Not only were the fierce Norse, Anglo, and Saxon nations arriving yearly by the thousands, but civil wars raged between petty eastern and western kingdoms, and with the conquest-minded Picts north of the Great Wall, this era is well capsulated in a passage from Tolstoy's book on Merlin. The first half of the 6th century was the apogee of the British heroic age, when the great kings of the north reigned with glory, warring with gallantry against the Angles, the Picts, and each other. The Quest for Merlin, page 34. There is a wonderful picture right here of St. Columba's conversion of the Celts. And so, at this volatile point in time, we enter the beginnings of the Arthurian age with the Roman eagle flown and the Druids put down, and land bled for unity. The Druids themselves were the priests of the Celts, while the British Celtic culture as a whole tended to be matriarchal by tradition. Their national religion was not. The word Druid means oakman in many languages, the root Dru always referring to oak, their most coveted tree, the king of all. They were an organized order which called themselves primal mystics, and whose magical systems were so profound that mankind has never since ceased to ponder over them. They were the doctors, scientists, lawyers, and ministers to the Celtic tribes, the mediators between man and the gods, held in awe by all, and afforded power in keeping with that of any king. To quote the report of Diodorus Siculus on their nature, he wrote, "The Druids are the wise and sovereign power in Celtia. All affairs of state are subject to their office, and they wield the rod of iron. The priests draw their entire authority from supernatural sanctions." There are documented accounts of Druids single-handedly averting war by simply walking in silence between the opposing armies, without held. And since one of the primary taboos of Druidic doctrine prohibited the writing down of any segment of their lore, the only extensive descriptive records which survive today are those that are written by the Roman writers, by the nation which launched the most vile efforts to extinguish the Druidic religion in favor of its own. One might well wonder for what extent such accounts by an enemy may be trusted for accuracy, but however biased, their records still represent an invaluable picture for us looking back, and since there are a few others available for comparison, several impressions of foreign visitors for Druidic Britain are included below, so that a better overview may be had of the priesthood, station, and function within Celtic society, after which we will move on to their specific beliefs and doctrines. The Druids were held in much honor above all other priesthoods, and had authority in peace and war. Posidonius. In former times, Druids could intervene and stop contending armies from fighting. Thus, even among the most savage barbarians, anger yields to wisdom. Strabo. The Druids celebrate the brave deeds of their famous men in epic verse, and are uplifted by searchings into things secret and sublime, immortality of the soul, and share Pythagorean beliefs. Above all, they strive to explain the high mysteries of nature. Ammianus, quoting Timagenes. Dogmas, the Druids profess the immortality of the soul. There is another life in other regions, and for this reason they bury their dead and with the things appropriate to them in life, sometimes even to defer the completion of business, payment, and debts until their arrival again from another world. Amanus Marcellinus. The Druids have one of their head who holds chief authority among them. When he dies, either the highest in honor among the others succeeds, or even sometimes by contest of skills. Caratacus. They discuss and impact to their youth many things respecting the stars and their motions, respecting the extent of the universe and of our earth, respecting the powers and majesty of the immortal gods. Caesar. They were acute in the knowledge of the stars and the calculations, using telescopes to bring down the magic of the moon by making brighter her light. Diodorus Siculus. The Druids are generally freed from military service, nor do they pay taxes, with the rest, encouraged by such rewards, may of their own accord come to their schools as are sent by their friends and relations. They are said to leave by heart a great number of verses. They are said to learn by heart a great number of verses. Some continue 20 years in their education. Neither is it lawful to commit these things to writing, though in almost all public and legal transactions and private keepings they use the Greek characters. Caesar. The Druids make their abode in the innermost groves of far-off forests. Lucan. The noblest youths followed their Druid teachers into secret forests. Mila, 45 A.D. And lastly, when the Romans had succeeded in driving the Druids from all parts of Britain onto their holy isle of Anglesey, this account was penned by Tacitus under the Roman commander Suetonius, who was charged by Caesar in AD 61 to destroy the Druids, and finally and utterly. On the shore stood the opposing army with its dense array of armed warriors, while between the ranks dashed women in black attire like the Furies, with hair disheveled, waving their hands all around the Druids, lifting up their hands to heaven and pouring forth dreadful imprecations. Sacred Let me read that again. So, on the shores stood the opposing army with its dense array of armed warriors, while between the ranks dashed women in black attire like the Furies, with hair disheveled, waving hands, all around the Druids, lifting up their hands to heaven and pouring forth dreadful imprecations. Scared our soldiers by the unfamiliar sight, so that, as if their limbs were paralyzed, they stood motionless and exposed to the wounds, and then urged to their generals' appeal and mutual encouragements not to quail of frenzied women. The Romans bore the standards onward, smote down all resistance, and wrapped the foe in the flame of his own brands. A force was set over the conquered, and the sacred groves devoted to mysterious superstitions were destroyed. That was from the Annals, the 14th of 30. The Druids were famed throughout Europe and Eastern countries for their excellence of their schools, libraries, and colleges. These were considered the finest to be had, said to have numbered in the hundreds at one time, and supreme among them were the institutions at Tara in Ireland, Oxford, Anglesey, and Iona. Very select, only the most promising youths were considered, usually from the upper classes of nobility, and the approach was unique, an unusual blending of natural philosophy and religion into one. To follow is a period quote showing Caesar's observations concerning the Druidic Colleges, also known as cores. The Druids were in complete possession of an engine of education. No persons were permitted to have any share in the public employment who had not been educated in their establishments. The high class were desirous of sending their children to them for schooling, and greedy to have them admitted into the order. Such colleges had the nature of monasteries. The youths whom the Druids educated are said to have been taken to the most secluded situations, to caves or woods, barns, and their training not to have been completed in less than 20 years. The young Druids, educated for particular or special purposes, were required to learn 20,000 verses before their education was complete. Children of this description were not permitted to have any intercourse with their parents until they turned 14 years of age, and this was evidently good policy to attach them to the order, and to prevent the influence of natural affection from interfering with its interest. The Druids would not permit a divided empire over the minds of its members. Caesar. One can deduce from this account, written by an opposing faction, that the Druidic universities must have been grand and influential institutions in their day. According to the Book of Ferrell, however, the education of youths destined specifically for priesthood was even more fantastic still. So here we have an illustration of the ladder of learning. Such comments refer to a system called Ur Granfid in the Welsh material, meaning these scales. The Eridac Fion in the Irish, meaning Fion's ladder. Both these terms, although different, apply to the same form of apprenticeship, not unlike two recognized forms of Welsh versus Irish Ogham, which survive. Such a scale format was based upon the Ogham tree alphabet and followed its order of ascension, each rung standing for a specific character and lesson. The Ogham script dealt with within the later lessons was a symbolic magical alphabet used by the Druids solely as a religious device for divination and revelation. There were rungs on this ladder, and plus one that was unnamed, in addition to their intermediary quests of mastery, making up the whole. The following excerpt well illustrates the old world concept of the ladder of learning. Out of timeless world, shadows fall upon time. From a beauty older than earth, a ladder the soul may climb. I climb by Fion's stair to a whiteness older than time. That was from the Gnostic Holy Verse. According to the Ferrell material, the Druids had held a rather insightful idea that children, specifically over adults, were possessed of a unique learning capabilities, which, if not catered to properly at the right time, would disappear by adulthood. This idea is very similar to the modern school of psychology, spearheaded by famed developmental psychologist Piaget, who postulated the theory of stages or critical periods within a child's early years. These he called windows of learning, time frames during a child's initial years, which each were open to one specific type of learning, intense and rapid, which would then close. Piaget said, explained why a youngster is able to learn several different languages perfectly, all at the same time, never confusing one system of grammar with another, a near superhuman feat for any mature adult mind. And then after a time, this linguistic window would close forever and another would open. Perhaps a window for rapid color or sound acquisition, and then another, and so on through puberty. This concept is also supported by award-winning physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, who observed and wrote, "There are children playing in the street who could solve some of my top problems in physics because they have modes of sensory perception that I lost long ago." The Druidic system of childhood education consisted of equal attention to both the seen and the unseen worlds, to quote again concerning the supersensitivities of youth. When men are terrified, children are only curious. It is difficult to frighten those who are easily astonished. The young have so little claim on the unknown that if they should see it, they would admire it. And then in part 2, chapter 12 of the Book of Feralt, there is another key quote relating to advanced quality of perception, which the Druids noted and worked with in their novices. Children can accept both this world and the other world with equal validity. Adults have lost this art, and therefore the first techniques of our education must be aimed at a reconstruction of those childlike abilities. This chief training school and international seminary of Western Druids was an anglicy, also called Mona or Muenad I in Proto-Welsh, which means island of teaching. This old title still echoes in the name of the waterway dividing Anglesey from the mainland, the Strait of Menai, as well as the root of Mona being a derivative of the Latin monasterium, meaning monastery or a dwelling place for priests. Exchanges of students and teachers between Druidic universities and the great libraries, colleges of Greece and Alexandria were common, especially notable in the similarity between the Greek, Orphic, and Celtic Druidic philosophies. When contrasting the Druidic attitude towards the education of children with that of the Greeks, it is interesting to quote the philosopher Euripides as saying, "Whoso neglects learning in his youth loses the past and is dead for the future." An interesting illustration can be drawn here concerning the nature of Druidic libraries founded by the priesthood in Britain. In addition to the large numbers of standard books maintained in Greek and Latin, there were also many specifically Druidical works recorded using the Ogham tree letters. Bethleusion in Irish used exclusively by the Druids. In such books, each Ogham letter was represented by a single leaf from the tree bearing its name, which was then strung together with the others on a long cord to form words and sentences. Sacred Druidic verse, forbidden by sacerdotal law to be represented any other way, could be preserved in this fashion, since the form of writing was not considered by the hand of man as trees were of the gods. Special longhouses or library halls were constructed to contain these lengthy leaf-on-cord record books. To read one, a student would begin at one end and then walk along its length, flipping through the leaves as he went. Special libraries cared for these unusual books, their sole responsibility being to replace the worn-out pages or leaves and keep the books in good readable order. This highly specialized practice explains why we today refer to the pages of a book as leaves, as in the popular catchphrase, the leaves of a book. The Druids based their system upon an abstract concept they called authority, which did not mean authority over other people or worldly matters, but over the self, and through the self, the world around them. Authority was accumulated in very much the same fashion as experience or wisdom, slowly over time through much dedication. The basic premise was that more spiritual work performed within one of the four elemental kingdoms, e.g., earth, water, air, or fire, the more that kingdom would respect you. Each time a latter step lesson was successfully completed, the apprentice was awarded one of the Glenny Droth, were glass beads, awarded one per lesson, which the student then strung on a leather cord and wore in secret as a symbol of the accomplishment. Such beads were also called nadrid or adder's snakes, serpent or adder, or beads or eggs. As in the knowing man, one versed in the mysteries was called a serpent or an adder, and this custom is not unlike that of the American Indians, who would mount earned feathers upon a headdress for display. It is also interesting to note that the custom of school teachers awarding gold or silver stars to outstanding students is one of many surviving remnants of Celtic education in our American culture, known as the Druid's foot, priests wore stars upon their soles of their feet to leave a trail of blessings wherever they went. They also awarded stars to the star pupils as marks of excellence. There we see some of those good old stickers that we used to get when we were in school. Other similar surviving Druidic customs include kissing under the mistletoe at Christmas, based on the older celebrations of Yule, the holly and the ivy, the character of the Easter bunny, and of coloring eggs, Easter being the old Gaelic festival of goddess Ishtar or Ostara, whose totem symbol of spring fertility was the hare rabbit, and the eggs symbolizing new life, the carving of pumpkins at Halloween, which goes back to the Celtic adoration of the head as a prize to ward off evil. Originally, turnips or squash were carved and then shining candles placed within to keep the household safe. One head as a safeguard for each child in the household. The head also symbolized the noble head of Bron the Blessed, a god whose own head lay buried beneath the Tower of London to protect the land from invasion. Halloween, or Samhain, the ancient festival of the dead, was the most important Druidic holiday of the year. Its custom of dressing up in bright costumes came from the country folks' effort to frighten off ghosts, which might be wandering the earth on this night. See Chapter 4, The Haunted Mountain. Also, bobbing for apples was a ritual game aimed at otherworld contact, apples being a symbol of the underworld. The custom of giving hearts on Valentine's Day. This was the day the Druids removed the heart from a white bull to examine it for omens for the summer to come. The cutting and decorating of the Christmas tree being a derivative of the Druidic Yule log, the three-stemmed peace symbol of the 1960s, having been patterned directly after the Druidic three rays of Awen, celebrated the first day of summer. Happy summer, everyone. The light half of the year, through the personage of Belanos, the ancient fire god of the light, and there are numerous others. Very few people today realize how many of our common customs are rooted specifically in pagan lore, and the Druids had a firm hand in formation of it all. For more detailed information, see visuals, previous page, and the chart on the next page. So, at the inception of his training, each apprentice was dedicated to a particular god form, who then acted directly as an advisor and otherworld guide, in addition to dictating the specific order of the scale steps to be undergone, which differed from student to student. The ritual through which the appropriate god form was initially selected and contacted forms one of the most intriguing passages in the Book of Ferald, and is covered in abbreviated form within this book. The Bardic Colleges themselves were divided into three ranks or classes of study. The Ovid, initial rank, sometimes honorary. These students wore green, the color of newness and growth, and studied medicine, law, astronomy, poetry, and music. A little bit of everything, similar to the liberal arts curriculum of today. So here we have the Druidic Wheel of the Seasons. And as you can see, you will look a little bit closer, you will see that all of these solstices fall on the 21st. Please, people, do not let them tell you that the solstice is on any other day but the 21st. Yesterday was June 21st. Happy summer solstice, everyone. The bard Beard wore robes of blue, the color of sky, harmony, and truth. These students were especially trained in the musical, fine arts, instruments, poetry, history, and song spell. Their function upon completion was to travel throughout the land, exchanging news, preaching diplomacy, gathering information for the administrative branches of Druidism, and preserving the best of culture through prose and music. The Druid Derwiden, robed in white, the color of purity, knowledge, and spiritual unity. They were the prophets, the ministers, and the judges and lawyers. Considered the most respected of the three ranks, they addressed the people once every 7 days upon the day of the sun, the origin of our Sunday, and stood facing the sun in the eye of God, the eye of truth. 4 times each year they met in public to settle disputes among tribes or individuals. The Druids were originally under strict vows not to marry, a tradition which continued unchanged until the domination of Christianity. Also, within this section should be mentioned the highest ranking officials, the Archdruid. The Ferrelt book mentions 3 Archdruids in Britain, in Anglesey, Iona, and at the Isle of Wight. Wight today was also known as Dragon's Isle. Similarly, the Celtic Druidic geographic world was divided up into 3 branches. 1, the Druids of Gaul, 2, the British Druids, and 3, the Irish Druids. The British group as a whole included England proper, Scotland, the Isle of Man, and Anglesey, often referred to as insular Druids. Each of the 3 continents had its own administrative body and archdruids, which, although separate, met together in Britain for a meeting in council once every 3 years, within the New Forest in Cornwall. Only the archdruids were allowed to wear implements of gold as insignias of rank, and nearly all current authorities agree that they held positions of vast, unquestioned influence. As the apprentice was deemed ready, he was taken through a series of 3 quests of mastery, which dealt with, in order, the past, present, future pattern, or to use the old Gnostic equivalent, root, pattern, destiny. As each of these quests concluded, the novice underwent an initiation, which paved the way onto the next level of study. To quote from R.J. Stewart's excellent book, The Prophetic Vision of Merlyn, 1986, Arcana Books Incorporated, a candidate for initiation has spent many months or even years learning the astrological and mythical relationships between the symbols and the spheres, and the meditative concepts have become an integral part of his understanding of shared reality. The initiate is utterly imbued with the powers and effects of the system, based upon a creation model of the 4 primal elements, and begins to grasp deep patterns of order, relationship, wholeness, and integration. The initiation ritual as a dramatic enactment in which the candidate for the mysteries expects to enter into a new perception of truth, a new level of consciousness related to the great and beautiful patterns of the signs, the elements, and the planets. In a sacred grove or chamber, the initiation ceremony begins. Each of the numerous actors in this ritual drama performs not a further model of the cosmic order, but a radically disruptive sequence, similar to that found at the close of the Merlin prophecies. Not a chaotic or frivolous disorder, but one based upon perception of reality, recapitulated by tradition and enlivened by individual experience and insight. What effect would such an initiation ritual have upon the candidate? At this point, Stuart's description, the author would like to interject what he sees as a definite and extraordinary connection between the above imagery and a major concept found within the Book of Ferrelt, namely the doctrine of constructive imbalance. In addition, there is an axiom to be found in part 4 of the work, which states, "From the point of greatest imbalance comes the point of greatest stability." The Druids held that, unlike the Eastern esoteric systems, which stress enlightenment through perfect balance, the spirit of man needs opposition or imbalance in his life to promote growth. The Welsh triads go on to tell us that a Druid must see all, study all, and suffer all to reach beyond the cycles governing rebirth. Suffering, surely being equivalent to covering, hold on, sorry. Perfect balance and then perfect balance. The Welsh triads go on to tell us that the Druids see all, study all, and suffer all to reach beyond the cycles governing rebirth, suffering, surely being equivalent to imbalance in one's life. The Druids called this doctrine in nidvedo in the Old Welsh. Restated, they reasoned that perfectly balanced forces result in a net movement of zero, and there can be no growth without movement. One of the key functions of a teacher then was to supply, encourage imbalance in the proper areas of the student's life so that movement would result in the direction of the weakness where it is most needed. Apparently, from the number of times this concept is mentioned within the framework of the feral material, there must at one time have been an axiom or triad which went something like this: perfect balance results in perfect stagnation. The R.J. Stewart quote continues as follows. The shortest possible summary of the otherworld initiation would be: an individual is transported magically to another world, which is the origin of all life and death and power. In this other world, certain events occur in a specific sequence, culminating in the vision of a tree, the fruit of which brings forth wisdom and prophecy. And during this journey, the initiate communes with the ancients, a tradition derived from the most primitive Celtic roots, the cult of the dead. Finally, the prophetic vision vouchsafes a sequence of insights, some of which are predictive, while others are unutterable in normal language. The prophetic vision of Merlyn. Another wonderful passage describing shamanic initiation is to be found within Ward Rutherford's scholarly book, The Druids, Magicians of the West, and reads as follows. More than anyone, the shaman can to be a vocation, that is, shamanism, that chooses him, not he it. Impelled by some power he cannot resist, often a succession of dreams, he withdraws from society of his fellows to live in the wild, fasting and meditating. He lays himself open as if it were to be very forces eminent in his natural surroundings. Soon he will become prey to terrible visitations. He may believe himself to be under incarnations in the space of a few nights, culminating in some dreadful act of symbolic self-immolation. At last he will reach stasis and his own ultimate reward, a total union with the cosmos, as well as the spirits of the dead. He will have emerged from his trauma in touch with all the spirits of earth and sky and sea in the worlds of Ramessen's informant, who was himself a shaman. From now on, all these will be his guides and helpers. Thus reborn, his first companions will be other shamans who recognize him as one fit to share their secrets, those of the animal and bird life, of cloud and climate, stars and their motion, herbs and their properties. But above all, he will learn the great myths which are the history of his people. And when he returns to the midst of his fellow men, probably under a new name as a token of his regeneration, they will quickly recognize that he is a different person, the recipient of special wisdom, at one with nature and the elements. He may now choose for his habitat some remote place in the forest, and is here he will have to be sought for consultation. The intimacy of his union with nature will be demonstrated by his very costume, so that when he wishes to commune with bird spirits, he will wear a dress of feathers. To reach animal spirits, he will wear skins or adorn himself with horns and antlers. When it is the spirits of trees or plants that he seeks, he will don green foliage of the colors of the plants, the life he seeks. He will don the green foliage of the colors of the plant life he seeks, flowers or fruits. He has become, one would say, a magician. The word the classical writers most frequently use in describing the Druids. Secrecy was also a key issue to the student of Druidism to learn, as was the standard case for the members of any mystery school. Dr. C.G. Jung, in his remarkable autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, stated that there is no better means of intensifying the treasured feeling of individuality than the possession of the secret which the individual is pledged to guard. Such possession had a in very powerful formative influence on my character. I consider it the essential factor of my boyhood. Then from the Welsh triads we learn conditions for which a druid is to be unseated: for performing murder or warfare, for telling a falsehood, or for divulging a secret which he holds. Things a bard ought not to reveal: injurious truth, the disgrace of a friend, the secrets of the Druids. Number three, or rather, this is still three keys, the three keys of Druidic mystery: to know, to dare, and to keep silent. And so the act of breaking a Druidic vow of secrecy was punishable by expulsion from the order. As mentioned earlier, the priesthood purposely cultivated the image of the primal mystic as one who is left an otherworld awe wherever they appeared, due to the atmosphere of mystic secrecy in which they moved. This was one group who understood all too well the importance of mystique in doctrine, for without it, religion becomes a transparent shell, powerless and impotent. Given below is an excerpt written by Bishop of the early Christian Church, in which he expresses his views on the topic of clerical mystique with a bold, refreshing insight, remarkably similar to that of the Druids. The people will always mock at things easy to be understood. It must needs have impostures. A spirit that loves wisdom and contemplates truth close at hand is forced to disguise it in order to induce the multitude to accept. Fictions are necessary to the people, and truths become deadly to those who are not strong enough to contemplate it in its brilliance. If the sacerdotal laws allowed the reservation of judgments and the allegory of words, I would accept the proposed dignity of condition that I might be a philosopher at home, and abroad a narrator of apologues and parables. In fact, what can there be in common between the vile multitude and sublime wisdom? Truth must be kept secret, and the masses need a teaching proportioned to their imperfect reason. Ciensis, Bishop of Tolmes, a great Kabbalist. Even though Even though Synesius was a high-ranking official of the early church, it seems obvious that his feelings reflect an attitude of gnosis, common among the Chaldean and other mystery branches of the younger and more pagan faith. But for just such reasons as he gave, it can easily be imagined why the Druids embraced the conceptual feel of the mystery school, an institution which also included a Greek and an Egyptian counterpart, as well as the later Chaldees and Gnostics, and an outside word of the matter of secrecy can be had from the Roman historian Posidonius, who reported the secret systems of Druids could be things to many people. Its more mystics aspects, however, being the exclusive domain of the Druids, bards, and those who studied with or under them. Another of the Druidic axioms states, "There be great power in silence." one of the many sacred Celtic verses centered around the theme of silence and secrecy as means to magical and personal empowerment. People are always afraid of things that they don't understand, and so it is easy to see how such a device produced awe-inspiring power for the priesthood. And this brings us to mention the Druidic affinity to numbers, and to the number 3 and its derivatives in particular. One of the most noted remnants of Old Celtic esoteric practice is the casting of wisdom into 3-line stanzas known as triads, or trio ver ins Prydain. In the Welsh, this tendency throughout Celtic art and literature has also come to be called the Law of Three Requests. The Druids maintained one founding principle above all, gleaned from observations of the forces of nature, and that was all manifestation occurs through 3, Ferald, or all learning takes place in 3s. Bardas, they believed that mystic manifestation resulted from the perfect union of 3 unequal parts, and for this reason their educational practices revolved around unit frames cast in 3s, 3 quests, 3-year cycles, 3 druidic ranks, etc., and their wisdoms were cast into triadic verse, both for ease of memorization and for magical impartment. Included below are 12 examples of triads taken from this fascinating book entitled Bardas, from the same source and library as the Book of Ferald. 3 virtues of wisdom: to be aware of all things, to endure all things, and to be removed from all things. 3 spiritual instructors of mankind: mastery of self, mastery of world, mastery of unknown. Note, the above verse is one of the many variations on the 3 quests of mastery theme, which occurs throughout Celtic literature. Such a theme is usually patterned following a past, present, future scheme known in Druid lore as the 3 ages of man. 3 rites of British Druid: keep wherever he goes, that no naked weapon be borne in his presence, that ye counsel be preferred to all others. 3 laws incumbent upon a teaching bard: that he take only one student of each degree at once, that men of vocal song associate not with men of instrumental, that he suffer his disciplines not to take disciples. 3 places upon a bard where blood may be drawn: from his forehead, from his breast, from his groin. Authors note there is a section in the Book of Ferald which mentions these same exact 3 body points as being the 3 energy vortices, sources of Awen, of the body, similar in theory to the 7 eastern chakras or meridians. The Ferald equated the groin center with darker feminine earth energies. 3 darker colors of the spectrum, e.g. violet, indigo, and blue. The breast being the green, balancing androgynous center, the forehead emanating the lighter masculine celestial energies, or the lighter colors, e.g. yellow, orange, and red. Stop that. Hey. Sorry. 1 second. Three things a man is: what he thinks he is, what others think he is, what he really is. 3 things that make rebirth necessary for man: his failure to obtain wisdom, his failure to attain independence, and his clinging to the lower self. 3 things to be controlled above all: the hand, the tongue, and desire. 3 signs of cruelty: to needlessly frighten an animal, to needlessly tear plants and trees, and to needlessly ask favors. 3 people deserving of admiration: those who look with love on the beauty of the earth, on little children, on a great work of art. 3 signs of compassion: to understand a child's complaint, to not disturb an animal that is lying down, to be cordial to strangers. 3 things avoided by the wise: expecting the impossible, grieving over the irretrievable, fearing the inevitable. The Druidic triads as a whole, said to number in the thousands, are broken down into 3 classes: triads of privileges and usage, or of worship and of song. In addition, students were required to memorize vast numbers of single-lined axioms, up to 20,000, of which innumerable examples are given throughout the lesson text. We continue from here with the Celtic treatment of numbers. Matters reduce themselves to 2 basic divisions, as does all their dualistic philosophy: bifold numbers, i.e. those even ones divisible by 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, etc., and trifold numbers, i.e. those odd ones divided by 3, 6, 9, 12, most notably to 33, 66, 99, and etc. The even digits were always assigned to the masculine powers, the elemental, concrete, visible world, while the odd digits were assigned the feminine attributes, the etheric, amorphous, hidden world. The arena of Celtic religion as a whole has come to be called a fivefold monotheistic system for just such reasons of numerology. The triple goddess is consideration with the dual god of light and dark, adding up to a total of 5, but all being in as a reflection of the one, i.e. the monotheism, the dweller in the beyond. This is dealt with especially in chapter 13, entitled Echoes of Ancient Stone. It was on account of this numeric reasoning that the apple came to be known as the fruit of the gods. When cut in 2 across the width, an apple displays 5 seeds embedded within a 5-pointed star, symbolic of the gods, unified under cover of 1. The pair served a similar symbolic function within the priesthood of Anglesey, refreshing when compared to some of the complex systems of religion popular in today's society. The essential name of Druidic religion reduces easily to one basic duality. For the Celts, all reality was a direct reflection from either the sun realm, i.e. the masculine, radiating active sphere, or the moon realm, i.e. the feminine, absorbing passive sphere. All matters, whether physical or mystic, were seen clearly in the light of masculinity or femininity, light or dark, reminding one of the basic Oriental concept of yin and yang. This key belief has caused many scholars to classify the Celts as dualistic system. Perhaps a word need be said here concerning the distinction between the terms Celtic and Druidic. Celtic refers to the people, the culture, while Druidic refers to the religion of the people, their priests. Simply put, all Druids were Celts, but very few Celts were actually Druids. Comparative elemental symbols. So here we have the symbol for sword, or the oaken symbol, sword of Nuada, or golden sickle. See here, we have the Celtic warrior, the Welsh fairy, the Irish tuatha, and the Druidic. So here, this symbol is the spear in the Celtic warrior. This one is also the raven's feather in the Welsh fairy. And in Irish tuatha is the spear of Luke. In Druidic, it is the Druidic wand or staff. And here the symbol is the shield, the oyster shell, the cauldron of the Dagda, the silver chalice, and this symbol here is the bow, the crystal holy stone, the stone of Thal, or the holy blue stone. Yes, it is on YouTube too, TikTok. The chart of the facing page clearly compares the concurrent symbolic systems of the various Celtic factions. This concept of dualism reflects strongly throughout Druidism as well as all Celtia, as is explained in detail in Chapter 12, the Druidic religious community was sharply segregated by gender. Gender-specific systems, they were called into two geographic centers, both islands, the motherhood of Avalon, Yin's Avalon, and the fatherhood of Anglesey, Yin's Mon. The Druids held the elemental nature of spirituality as being strictly and observably twofold. One, in the physical world, opposite energies attract. Two, in the spiritual world, like forces attract. The basic set of truths is acknowledged even in today's society through sayings like birds of a feather flock together, or water seeks its own level, etc., or as the ancient Roman philosopher Marcus Aurelius put it, not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, things that have a common quality ever quickly seek their kind. The subtle truth present behind sayings of this kind gave rise to what is called in the Herald the doctrine of separations. This agreement, which according to legend was made following the Battle of the Trees in 400 BC, established that children or people wishing to become priests and priestesses be sent to their own kind for schooling, boys, men to Anglesey, girls, women to Avalon, an agreement of sorts between the religious factions of the day, and teaching systems differed as well as they were also gender specific, although based on exactly the same premises. Two paths from the same place leading in the same direction, only the methodology differed. And since like energy worked best and still does with like energy, serious magical rituals seldom, if ever, involved mixed gender, as is the common norm today in Wiccan practices. Nevertheless, one key writer from today's occult revival movement, and there are many more, a growing number, has touched insightfully upon this key concept. Magical factors differ for each of the sexes. There is a particular aridity that is physically notable about an unfulfilled woman. This is because the failure to complete the circuit of force through the aura results in magnetic starvation. This does not occur in the man. The problem is one of congestion of force. Circuit for the flow can be found. In man, the excess will be expressed lower centers in some form of demanding occupation, either physical or spiritual. In a woman, these forces never come down in this way. Gareth Knight, The Secret Tradition of Arthurian Legend. This passage illustrates the differences between men and women, and therefore the impetus behind developing differing systems of spiritual growth. Within a mixed gendral system, every energy does indeed flow, as the laws of physical attraction, of the push and pull, dictate it must, but when viewed from a standpoint of spiritual interaction, i.e., like attracts like, this flow is often just destructive and distorting. Energy moves from the male to the female. Men manifest expansive energy and women contractive or absorptive, and stops there. There is no return for the male, no circulation. This condition is known to occultists as destructive interference, and does not occur within like gender rituals where energies of the same type are built up and then brought to a unified point of focus. Sir James G. Fraser, in his treatise of sympathetic magic, dubbed this principle as the law of similarity, asserting that like produces like in magic. This one area of awareness instantly distinguishes the common multigender paganism of today, which tends to view human energies as simple ends of a magnet, from authentic Druidism, which held to more accurate precepts based upon observable psychic law. In today's pagan movement, man-woman groups are the norm, not so much on account of any concrete reasoning other than perhaps the old men and women were made to work together line, but others simply because men are not comfortable with other men. It's unmanly, such as cultural stereotyping makes pure gender groups very difficult to make work, since boy girl patterns are superficially more comfortable because of being socially conditioned from birth. Here society has done the seeking magician another backward turn indeed. The Druids were scientists, both of the visible and invisible worlds, and they knew that specific laws governed each world, and what was more, as the worlds themselves differed, so did their laws. One prime example of this concept being mirrored in the physical world are the two opposing hemispheres of the brain, each designed for opposing functions, neither touching, yet both contributing to the whole. Jason Golden, MD, 1988. In the same article, Dr. Golden goes on to mention the laboratory verified facts that men's physiology reacts directly to the sun's cycles, while women's follow the moon phases. The Druids would no doubt have been the first to bask in the light of such confirmations of these basic principles of differentiation, long held by mystics like themselves, who dared to look beyond the narrow bounds of normal human sexuality and apply what they found there. Even the early Christian church seemed to extol the merits of segregated spiritual life. For those who were called to it, St. Columba, when speaking in the 6th century on the value of chastity among the clergy, once remarked, "Where there is a cow, there will be a woman, and where there is a woman, there will be mischief." No wonder he ended up destroying Avalon. Then there is the modern therapeutic practice known as homeopathy, which concerns the key to treating all illness like being like cures like, another manifestation of the beneficial principle of like energy interaction. The Druids, with their skills of drawing spiritual lessons from observations of natural patterns, could easily have pointed the similarity between gender-specific magic and the manner in which like-tuned pitchforks behave. I'm going to give you just a second here give me just a minute while I plug in, make sure we don't lose our battery over here on TikTok. And while we're doing that, I also have a tuning fork. So, a little bit of tuning fork sound for you. So pitchforks, attuned to the same musical note, exhibit a natural trait called sympathetic vibration, and this means that if one fork is struck, then another fork of the same pitch can be caused to vibrate without any physical contact whatsoever, even if stationed across the room. What can this tell us to support the Druidic stand on gender-specific spiritual work? A great deal. As we have seen the ancient physical laws state that like forces attract, and so here we have a reflection of that truth within classical physics, where two forces can achieve interaction only when they match the match an energy structure exactly. Extending this parallel back into Druidic perspective, men and women represent the two basic primordial tones of creation. Different tones. Spiritually, a woman could not impart esoteric truth upon a male student with any true depth. Any impact would be superficial and lack the ring of truth, wouldn't resonate deep down. Religious truth and lack the religious truth is it is stated in the feral spreads out like ripples across a pond, mirroring itself in a grand reflection of the universe overhead. And it is this pitchfork analogy we hold such a reflection. Such principles were also clear to the renowned psychologist and Gnostic Dr. Carl Jung when he wrote, "Man and woman became a devil to each other when they do not separate their spiritual paths, for the nature of created beings is always the nature of differentiation." For an in-depth look at the application of those concepts, see Chapter 12. The Druids revered two stages in the growth cycle of man above others: extreme youth and extreme old age, the enlightened child and the wizened old man. It is the author's belief that the phenomenon most probably stems from the physiological nature of man, the hormonal makeup of his being. Only in extreme youth and then again in old age are hormone levels in the blood low, permitting a clarity of thought and a psychic perception not easily achieved or maintained in middle age. "Children and old fools speak the truth," goes a saying which can be found in one form or another in a great number of cultures, although all around the world, and it is easy to see why. Both these stages of life are fairly devoid of the overpowering preoccupations of sexual compulsion, that animal instinct which functions to ensure the continuity of the species, and it is a medical fact that hormonal levels in the blood drop yearly and drastically past the mean age of 40 to an almost negligible level by 80. Is there a more common sounding cliche from the mouth of a youngster than "boys are disgusting" or "I hate girls"? And then there's a typical adult response which goes something like, "Oh, you won't feel that way when you grow up," which is usually true and precisely the point. Why? Just exactly what is this feeling so universal among children that they seem destined to outgrow? Does it hint at anything deeper? Does it connect in some way with the obvious heightened awareness and abilities? The author believes so. Children are all too often told about the birds and the bees without being told that they are different from the birds and the bees, and they are not birds and bees. And such instinctive patterns are meant for animals to follow, but for humans to master. And at what expense is this distinction not being made? The enlightened child is one gifted beyond his years with supernatural and spiritual knowings. Christ was one, as was the Buddha and Mohammed and Plato and so on. Each of these men came into adult life celibate, not taking a wife or engaging in cross-sexual relations as a means of maintaining their heightened awareness, and each state as much in his own way and through their example. The wizened old wizard is an extreme example at the other end of the spectrum. The image of the powerful, eccentric sage living in seclusion on a mountaintop or cave or deep within a forest had become an archetypal image of all the world culture. Why? Why would extreme old age, normally debilitating state, in some instances be viewed as a means to superhuman power and authority? It is due to the experience of years. Is it due to the experience of years alone? The author does not think so. With celibacy, a chosen state of abstinence is extended through life into old age. The life force accumulates, builds within to produce a powerful sage instead of a senile, decrepit. Examples of this principle are seen in every culture, including Druidic ones. Such a lifelong discipline also produces an altered state of heightened awareness, which, when coupled with old age, can result in a wizard who lives on the very fringe of reality. In his delightful book entitled Merlyn, author T.H. White points out that the only way to understand a true magician is to cease trying. All this, when viewed in the light of a celibate magical lifestyle, suddenly becomes understandable. For the reasons stated above, the Druids whose life goals were to achieve superhuman status did not marry. In fact, it is directly stated in Chapter 6 of Therald's material that only the lower classes of Druidism were permitted to marry at all, and never the core priesthood itself, as these pure states of Druidism fell into decay and pollution up through the Middle Ages. Bards married whomever they wanted, and intelligent sexual standards based upon the basic laws of energy, action, interaction were disregarded, primarily because the Christian church encouraged promiscuity and discouraged birth control within marriage as a sanctioned means to increase its own following. Also, the survival of the matriarchal Druidic line through Avalon to Wicca helped encourage the motherhood. Motherhood was not known to encourage continence past the age of virginity. Consequently, there is a great deal of difference between the early Druidic doctrines and the later Christianized ones. But even so, the Catholic Church to this day does not allow their priests to marry or engage in heterosexual relations, and this without doubt is blatant remnant of old Druidic law. Perhaps it would fit as well at this point to discuss briefly just what did happen to Druids of Anglesey and the motherhood of Avalon after the coming of the Christian era. True to form, the two Celtic branches dissipated in different ways and direction. The surviving Druids took refuge on the Caledonian or Scottish island of Iona, its own Welsh name being Innis Druidiarc, meaning Druid's Island, where they fused with the early Christian beliefs as imported and set forth by St. Columba in 563 AD, forming a unique order known as the Church of the Colleges. This paganized church priesthood was really a continuation of traditional Druidic lifestyle, but under cover of Christian sanction. And because the Druids who settled there made the most of the similarities which existed between the two systems, and some of them were major similarities, the Colleges persisted undisturbed well into the Middle Ages, the remote geographic isolation having been a factor as well. From this point, further Christian persecutions forced the Colleges underground, where they became known as the Gnostics, a Greek word meaning one who knows, and existed under the secret guise of semi-acceptability, more or less, to the present day. As a result of this merging of the old and new, the Christian church is full of rites and rituals based directly upon Druidic doctrine, and there are many good books which deal specifically with this issue. Two of the most obvious of these are The Adoration of the Cross, an ancient Druidic symbol of crucifixion, and The Holy Sacraments of Communion, based directly upon the older bread and wine sacraments of the earth. How could it happen that these alleged practices of Christ bear such a striking resemblance to those of the Druids? Could it be true, as the Old English legend says, that Jesus came as a boy to the shores of Britain to be schooled in an ancient wisdoms, here following in the same timeless question created, or stated rather, by visionary poet William Blake with unsurpassed elegance? And did those feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountains green? And was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? The Avalon Motherhood, on the other hand, was forced underground immediately. A Druid might have explained this as a natural tendency by virtue of gender, as women tend to integrate within, as opposed to men who tend to externalize. The dramatic, tragic, and sudden event which forced the order out of sight, occurred in 563 AD when St. Columba, under papal orders, pulled down the Tor stone from atop the crest of Avalon, so as to purge the witches from the hill. Since the earliest years of millennia, there had been a Christian church within Glastonbury, but now a monastic settlement was established within the vale itself, forcing two disjunct worlds to occupy the same spiraled banks from then on. As the occult writer Diane Fortune so aptly put it, the abbey is the holy ground, consecrated by the dust of the saints. But up here, at the foot of the Tor, the old gods have their part. So we have two abbeys, the holiest earth in England, down among the water meadows, and upon the green heights the fiery pagan forces that make the heart leap and burn, and some love one and some the other. And the Tor is the most pagan of hills. Never once has it cried, "Thou hast conquered, O Galilean," from Glastonbury. As an underground order, the Motherhood then became the witches of classical fame, always there, possessing of great wisdom, and always held in awe and fear. Then up through the horrific persecutions of the Inquisition to the witch hunts of the later Middle Ages, the Motherhood has succeeded in maintaining a clear, although disjunct, unity through Wicca to this day. Aside from the Motherhood, the Druids have also come to be remembered, albeit through the Christian Church, by their religious motto, Ygwr and Urban Bid, which translated meaning the truth against the world. The key word against is solely intended to illustrate the difference between world truth, i.e., mass truth of culture, society, and individual truth. The concept of truth was highly important to the Druids, as evidenced by the large proportion of surviving triads and axioms which mentioned the ideal in various contexts. Chapter 3 of the Book of Ferrell deals specifically with the notion and makes clear that the priesthood did not embrace a universal objective view of truth, or held that it varied from individual to individual, culture to culture, as human conscience varied. Conscious in the eye of God, in the heart of man. To quote this source, the Druids believed that following proper conscience, i.e., to listen to one's inner voice as opposed to hearing only what one wishes to hear, would lead to a divine state of certainty known as right action. An ideal also held sacred by the Greek schools of Socrates and Pythagoras. The doctrine of right action involved objective individual truth gained by properly following conscience, which would in turn lead one to discover his true path of destiny. This concept was later manifest in the Gnostic schools in the Middle Ages, as embodied in the Latin phrase carpe diem, meaning to seize the day, to live life to its fullest, and to make the most efficient use of one's experiences and energies from day to day. To look back upon the ages of Druidism, Celtic events seem to fall clearly within three historic guidelines as follow. First stage, from the Battle of the Trees in 400 BC to the destruction of Anglesey in 61 AD. Second age, from 61 AD through the Roman occupation through the death of Arthur in 516 AD to the destruction of Avalon in 563 AD. And the third age, from 563 AD through the Bardic Middle Ages to the present day. And from there on, the Christian Church continued to persecute what was left of Druidism. One after another, pontiff after bishop quoted the bias of the Roman writers, capitalizing upon the areas of sacrifice, conveniently sidestepping the fact that among the Jewish founding fathers of Christianity, human sacrifice to Jehovah was common. The polytheistic worship, the later point of contention is especially interesting, as the Catholics themselves prayed earnestly to many saints who were mere Christianized versions of earlier pagan Celtic deities. Accepted examples of these among religious scholars include Saint Anne, the Celtic water goddess of Anna or Anu, Saint Bridget, the Celtic fire goddess Bride, Saint Brendan, the Celtic god Bran, the blessed, Saint Corneille, the Celtic forest god Cernunnos, and there are numerous others. It is special interest to mention that Saint Corneille, the horned wild god of the green forest, was never a known personage at all, and is actually the same cloven-hoofed, antlered god, which the church later patterned a devil image after making a canonized saint, and their own Lucifer one of the same. Then concerning these sacrifice, it was well acknowledged that the priesthood presided over animal sacrifice, the white bull having been a special case to entice a favor of the gods, but only in Gaul, Lesser Britain, across the English Channel, present-day France, was human sacrifice mentioned. In Ireland, sacrifice has never existed as a topic except when initiated by few like St. Patrick, who were looking for good, moral-sounding reasons to obliterate the order. But since the scope of the 21 lessons deals specifically with the British branch, we will not further debate matters which do not pertain. Regardless the numbers of geographic versions of Druidism mentioned by the classical writers, it is made clear that Britain herself was considered the motherland of the entire system. To quote Julius Caesar on the Gaulish Druids, it is believed that their discipline was discovered by Britain and transferred to Gaul, and today those who wish to study the subject more deeply travel as a rule to Albion to learn it. And as to finalize the point, William Blake claimed in his Jerusalem that all things began and end in Albion's ancient Druid rocky shore. What is it about Britain that has captivated the imaginations of mankind throughout time and continues to do so? Some think that Ireland occupies a unique geographic location on the Earth where many key ley lines of powerful magnetic current pass underneath and meet, making this land itself an easy access point into the other world. The reasoning could well account for the question of why an advanced religious system like that of the Druids came to fruition in Britain as opposed to elsewhere. Some theorize that Druidic knowledge was brought to the shore years ago, and to this the author wishes to point out that this very idea is hinted at in both the Book of Ferralt and the Welsh Arthurian Chronicles. But whatever the case is, one thing seems clear: the Druids would have certainly been acutely aware of the unique energy atmosphere created by the dragon lines which underscored Britain, and then would have gone on to use them within their institutions. The fact that Stonehenge has always been associated by tradition with Merlin and the Druids hints at the same recognition of an unseen earth energy center, while it has long been known that the Druids themselves did not build the henge or any other large monuments, save smaller type stone circles. There is a simple evidence that they did recognize the unique energy potentials of such areas and use them accordingly. The priesthood held that the Godhead could not be worshipped within any structure made by human hands. Only places of seclusion and wild beauty fashioned by the hands of Mother Nature alone would do. So they worshipped in sacred groves in far-off places called nemetons, that the Druids were aware of the astronomical alignments present in many of the Neolithic monuments they frequented is well documented by many period writers. This hints further at the Druids' knowledge of hidden forces, the likes of which have come before public attention and acknowledgement only in very recent years. To quote historians and esoteric writer Nikolai Tolstoy on the significance of Stonehenge in the time of Arthur, we read, "For my part, I have no hesitation in suggestion that the Stonehenge was the traditional Omphalos, i.e., Greek for sacred navel, of Britain, that it was in the 5th century AD still regarded as a uniquely sacred spot with special access to the other world." From The Quest of Merlyn, 1985. Such access points would have been of prime interest to the Druids on account of both themselves and the students using their teaching systems, for to them the non-physical otherworld was every bit as real and tangible as the physical, and one bore constantly upon the other. The Celtic culture has already been referred to as the Twilight Peoples by writers too numerous to list, and why should such a term be so fitting? Because clearly both the race and its priest revered in between flux states of the world, thinking them a direct doorway, an emanation from the ghostly realms of the spirit. Things which were and yet were not needed them and were present in great variety within all their art forms, literature, music, and religion. Examples of such mystic elements are the sacred mistletoe, which grew upon the oak, a plant yet not a plant, drawing its life force from essence of the king of trees, crystal glass, which was seen and yet transparent, like the Tor of Glastonbury, meaning glass-like place, whose ancient name was Ynswiston, or Glass Isle, long standing as an access point to the other world. Fog, dew, mist, cloud, waters which were not waters, the sun times of dawn, dusk, midnight, and eclipse, those moments in between light and dark which belong to neither, and the mysterious mushroom, a venerated god food, neither plant nor mineral. Yet the clearest example of this form of Druidic veneration would seem to be their reverence for the 6th day of the new moon as a supreme time for working magic. The obvious question is, why the 6th day as opposed to the infinitely more obvious choice of full dark moon phases? The answer is simple. When looked at in the light of the Celtic twilight adoration, by 6th day the Druids were referring to the first quarter of the waxing moon, the phase in between the dark and full times, the twilight phase of the moon, so to speak. Not only is this mystic time referred to in the Book of Ferald, but also mentioned in the Roman historian Pliny, who commented, "Seldom was the mistletoe found growing upon the oak, but on such an occasion the Druids gathered it with due religious ceremony, if possibly on the 6th day of the new moon, when the influence of the orb was waxing and said to be at its height. Following an elaborate banquet, a white-clad priest cut the plant from the oak tree with a golden sickle, while another Druid held out a white cloak for its reception. They believed that the mistletoe, immersed in water within a cauldron, would impart fecundity to born animals, and that it is the antidote for all poisons, its name meaning all healing." Cutting of the mistletoe here in this illustration. Even their choices of celebration days within the natural calendrical years were those in-between times, the cross-quarter days, which were the points of greatest inequality or imbalance, those points which would maintain segregated polarity as opposed to equalizing it. The Druids knew that such uneven times were more prone to produce conflicts consciousness alterations, i.e. otherworld access, than the balanced times of the spring and autumn equinoxes, paired with their divisors. For their reasons, the following times were venerated. So, Midsummer's Day, the day of the greatest lunar nightly imbalance. Midwinter's Day, the day of the greatest solar daytime imbalance. Beltane, Eve of May Day, the cross-quarter night, which marks the beginning of the summer, the light half of the year. Samhain, Eve of November, the cross-quarter night, which marks the beginning of winter and the dark half of the year. And so, we'll stop here on page 32. Continue on this prologue tomorrow. Thank you for joining us today. You guys have been wonderful listeners. We'll see you next time.